In the last 7 days, the 2026 Senate map has been turned completely upside down. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Two events happened in rapid succession that nobody saw coming, and both of them are going to reshape the final stretch of this race for the majority. On July 10th, Democratic nominee Graham Plattner dropped out of the main Senate race after rape accusations became public. 1 day later, Lindsey Graham died. 2 bombshells, 7 days, and the map looks nothing like it did before either of those things happened. So today, we're walking through every single race with the freshest polling data available, including brand new numbers out of both Maine and South Carolina, and we're going to see exactly where the battle for Senate control stands right now. Let's build this map from the ground up, starting on the West Coast. Oregon stays solidly blue. Democrat Ron Wyden wins his re-election without much of a fight. Idaho goes the other direction just as decisively. Republican Jim Risch is sitting on a 36-point polling lead. Safe red, no discussion needed. Montana is next, and this is an open seat race. Republican Kurt Almey, the former U.S. attorney for the District of Montana, is running to replace the retiring Steve Daines, and his main competition comes from independent Seth Bodnar, the former president of the University of Montana. Almey leads by 21 points in the current polling average. Safe red, Wyoming, and South Dakota follow the same script. Wyoming is the most conservative state in the country, and Harriet Hageman is on track to replace outgoing Cynthia Lummis with ease. South Dakota has Mike Rounds projected to win by 24 points. Neither of these races is remotely competitive. Nebraska is the first race that actually requires a conversation. Independent Dan Osborne is back challenging Republican incumbent Pete Ricketts, and his presence alone keeps this from being a clean hold. Ricketts leads by 4.7 points in the polling average. He'll almost certainly win. When Osborne ran against Deb Fischer in 2024, he lost by over 6 points, and this state went for Trump by 20 dollars. But the margin is narrow enough on paper to keep this in the lean red column rather than solid or likely. Nebraska goes lean Republican. By the way, please leave your questions or comments in the comment section. I will answer each one individually as time permits. Also, I would be very happy if you like the video and subscribe to my channel. Now, let's continue. Kansas stays likely red. Roger Marshall is not a particularly popular incumbent, but he leads Democrat Adam Hamilton by 8 points, and this is one of the most structurally Republican states on the entire map. Hamilton is a genuinely strong candidate, but he's climbing a very steep hill. Marshall wins his second term. Oklahoma is safe red, no further analysis needed. Texas is where things get genuinely interesting. Ken Paxton, the scandal-laden attorney general who knocked out incumbent John Cornyn in the GOP primary runoff, is now the official Republican nominee, and he's in a tight race against Democrat James Tallarico. The polling shows a very close contest, but Paxton has maintained a lead throughout. Here's the historical context that matters. In 2018, Beto O'Rourke generated enormous national enthusiasm running against Ted Cruz, and he still lost by nearly 3 points. This race is shaping up similarly. Tallarico and Paxton neck and neck in the polls, but Republicans historically outperform their surveys in Texas on Election Day. And the broader trend is important too. Trump won Texas by under 6 points in 2020, then expanded that to nearly 14 points in 2024. The state is moving back toward the GOP, not away from it. Texas leans Republican. Colorado and New Mexico don't have polling yet, but John Hickenlooper and Ben Ray Lujan are both cruising to second terms. Both go likely blue. With the western half of the continental map filled in, Republicans hold 39 seats to Democrats' 37. Alaska is the second closest race on the entire board right now. Mary Peltola is challenging two-term Republican incumbent Dan Sullivan, and Sullivan leads by just 0.9 points in the latest weighted polling average. Peltola is an exceptional candidate. She's already proven she can win Alaska-wide by building a coalition that reaches well beyond the Democratic base, but Alaska is a deeply red state. Trump won it by over 13 points in 2024, and the state very rarely elects Democrats to federal office, even when it occasionally goes for independents. Sullivan is ahead. Alaska goes tilt Republican. Minnesota is staying on the board as lean Democratic, but it's tighter than Democrats would like. Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan is the likely Democratic nominee against Republican journalist Michelle Fischbach, and the current polling average shows just a 3.5-point gap between them. That is surprisingly narrow for a state that hasn't voted Republican at the presidential level since 1972. But the context matters. Even with Tim Walz, the state's own governor, and on the national ticket as VP nominee, Kamala Harris only carried Minnesota by 4.2 points in 2024. Without that home state boost in 2026, this race could tighten considerably. Minnesota leans Democratic, but this is a state to watch very closely. Iowa is leaning Republican, but the gap has been shrinking. Republican Ashley Hinson is running to replace Joni Ernst and currently leads Democrat Josh Turek by 2.9 points, a race that was closer to 10 points just a month ago. The main reason it's tightened is the simultaneous governor's race, which is generating real Democratic energy statewide. On the Senate level, though, the fundamentals still heavily favor Hinson. Iowa went for Trump by 13 points in 2024, and the state's polling has a well-documented history of overstating Democratic support. Iowa goes lean red, Illinois stays solid blue. Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton takes over for the retiring Dick Durbin, who has held that seat for 3 decades. Michigan is the first flip on this map from blue to red, and it's the race that could single-handedly determine which party controls the Senate. Mike Rogers is running to replace the retiring Gary Peters, and he faces Democrat Abdul El-Sayed in November. Here's the shift that's happened in recent weeks. Rogers was leading by upwards of 5 points for most of this year, and that lead has now collapsed down to just 0.2 points. Michigan is genuinely one of the most evenly divided states in the country. Biden won it in 2020 before Trump flipped it back in 2024. Rogers is still ahead, barely, and he's proven he can outperform his polls after coming within 0.3 points of flipping Michigan's other Senate seat in 2024, despite trailing by 5 or 6 points in virtually every survey. With a 0.2 point lead in the average, Michigan goes tilt red. But this race is about as close to a coin flip as anything on the board. Ohio leans Republican, and this is a race people are going to point to as evidence that the political map has fundamentally changed. John Husted, running for the remaining 2 years of J.D. Vance's Senate term, leads former 3-term Senator Sherrod Brown by 2.8 points, and that lead has held consistently across the last 6 months of polling. Brown is a formidable candidate who has spent decades building a unique political brand in Ohio, and he'll make this expensive for Republicans. But the reality is that Brown just lost his re-election in 2024, and Ohio is no longer the swing state it used to be. Trump won it by 11 points in 2024. Husted is in a strong position. Ohio goes lean red. New Hampshire leans Democratic, but it's not airtight. Democrat Chris Pappas leads former Governor John Sununu by 5.4 points in the polling average, and the market odds give Pappas an 86% chance of winning. But Sununu is a genuinely formidable candidate. He held this exact Senate seat before losing it in the 2008 blue wave, and New Hampshire has had a Republican governor for the entire past decade. Pappas is the clear favorite, but Sununu could absolutely pull an upset if conditions shift. New Hampshire goes likely Democratic. Now, Maine. This is the story of the cycle, and it keeps evolving. Graham Plattner secured the Democratic nomination in June. Then rape accusations became public. He dropped out on July 10th. And now, on July 25th, somewhere between 500 and 600 Democratic delegates are going to gather at a state convention to choose his replacement. This isn't a statewide primary vote. It's a small group of party insiders making the call, much like what happened when Democrats replaced Joe Biden on the presidential ticket in 2024. We actually have early polling on the convention. It's surveying Democratic voters, not the delegates themselves, but delegates tend to track voter sentiment fairly closely. The frontrunner is clear. Troy Jackson, the former president of the Maine State Senate, leads with 40% support. Nirav Shah sits at 23%, Shenna Bellows at 14%, and everyone else is in the low single digits. The market odds on Kalshi back this up, giving Jackson a 78% chance of becoming the nominee. Here's what's critical. We also have 3 fresh polls matching Jackson directly against 5-term incumbent Susan Collins, released just this past week. Collins leads Jackson by 3 points across all 3 surveys. That means even with Plattner gone and a new candidate coming in, Collins is still ahead. And this shouldn't be shocking. In 2020, every single poll had Collins losing to Sarah Gideon all year long. She didn't just win, she won by close to double digits. Collins has a documented, almost uncanny ability to outperform her polling in tough environments. Maine goes lean Republican. Collins is on track for a 6th term. Massachusetts and Rhode Island are both solid blue. Ed Markey leads by 23 points. Jack Reed by 17. Neither race has any real drama. New Jersey and Delaware are the same story. Cory Booker and Chris Coons both win their re-elections by 15 points or more. Solid blue. Down to the south, Arkansas is safe red. Tom Cotton wins his 3rd term by 18 points. Louisiana is safe red. Mississippi is likely red. Cindy Hyde-Smith leads by 8.7 points, which sounds comfortable until you compare it to what Republicans normally put up in that state. She'll probably win by double digits, but it's unlikely to clear 15. Kentucky is likely red as well. Mitch McConnell is stepping down, ending one of the longest Senate tenures in American history. And Republican Congressman Andy Barr is projected to replace him with an 11-point lead in the polls. Not safe, but solidly in GOP hands. West Virginia, Tennessee, and Alabama are all safe red strongholds where Republicans win comfortably. Virginia goes solidly blue. Mark Warner leads his likely Republican opponent by 19 points in the current polling average. That margin will tighten as the campaign develops and voters get to know the Republican nominee, but Warner is not losing this race. North Carolina is the most likely Democratic flip on the entire map, and Roy Cooper is the reason why. The former 2-term governor leads Republican Michael Whatley, the former RNC chair, by 6.5 points in the polling average. Cooper has better name recognition, stronger approval ratings, and a massively superior fundraising operation. Whatley is a credible candidate, but the gap between these two is substantial. North Carolina goes likely Democratic. Republicans don't need it to hold the majority. They have other pathways, but losing it is a real hit. South Carolina now has a vacancy where Lindsey Graham used to be. Graham passed away on July 11th, just one day after Plattner dropped out in Maine, and at the time of his death, he was ahead by 7.4 points in the polling average. Unlike Maine, South Carolina isn't doing a delegate convention to pick a replacement. Republican voters in the state will select a new nominee through a special primary on August 11th. Congressman Russell Fry has emerged as the frontrunner, sitting at 58% on Kalshi to win the primary nomination. If Fry does become the candidate, which looks likely, the general election projection gives him an 89% chance of winning. We don't have specific polling yet for the general election matchup, but given what we saw with Graham on the ballot, South Carolina stays likely red. Georgia has Jon Ossoff seeking a 2nd term, leading Republican Mike Collins by 4.3 points in the current average. Ossoff has the incumbency advantage, the fundraising edge, and a well-established ground operation. But this is Georgia, a state where Joe Biden won by literally 0.2 of 1 percentage point in 2020 before Trump took it back in 2024. Collins has a real shot at flipping this seat. Based purely on the numbers right now, Georgia goes lean Democratic, but watch this race closely. Florida wraps up the map, and it's a very different race than it would have been even 5 years ago. Ashley Moody leads by 4.8 points in the polling average, and while that might look closer than expected, this state simply isn't genuinely competitive anymore. Trump carried Florida by 13 points in 2024. Democrats haven't won anything major here in over a decade. Moody serves out the remainder of Marco Rubio's term. Florida goes lean Republican. So here's the final picture. Based entirely on current polling averages, Republicans are on track to hold Senate control, winning 53 seats compared to Democrats' 47. The GOP flips Michigan, while Democrats flip North Carolina, a net 1-seat swing that still leaves Republicans firmly in control for the second half of Trump's presidency. But here's what you need to understand about this map. The difference between a 53-seat Republican majority and a 51-seat Democratic majority comes down to 3 or 4 states, each decided by under 1 point. Michigan at 0.2, Alaska at 0.9, Maine, where a brand new candidate is being selected in 9 days, and Georgia, where a 1-point shift in turnout changes everything. This race is far from over, and the next month alone, with Maine's convention on July 25th and South Carolina's primary on August 11th, is going to reshape this map significantly before we even get to Labor Day. Drop your prediction in the comments. Which party controls the Senate in January 2027? And which single race do you think ends up being the one that decides it? I'll be watching this map every week as it keeps evolving. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.